are kiln glass artists and fiber artists, and have a lot to talk about tonight. They're going to share a little bit about themselves and their practice. So thanks so much, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming. So we're Camp Copeland Studio. We started in 2015 creating handmade home goods, both in glass and fiber. And we believe in creating goods and decor for a mindful living. We're based in Braddock, Pennsylvania, so a bit of a hike from here, but still within the Pittsburgh region. We're going to talk a little bit first about what Camp Copeland Studio is and kind of how we collaborate as a married couple within this business. And then we're going to talk about each of our work kind of separately and how we kind of got to where we are today. So this is a goofy picture of us that we had to take for something or other, but it shows in the background some of our work. And so a little bit of history about Camp Copeland. We started in 2015, like I mentioned. I was fresh out of grad school. I had gone to an applied craft and design program, getting my MFA. And we knew that we wanted to start some kind of a business, and we knew that we wanted to start to make a living off of our creativity, but we didn't really know exactly what that looked like. Also, we had been living in Portland, Oregon for 10 years and had just moved back to this region, kind of looking for a place to plant some roots and do a lot of work. So, so we landed in Braddock. We landed in a vacant house that we are still renovating, and we'll be renovating for the rest of our lives, probably. We also have acquired the vacant house next door to us and are renovating that to be our studio space. So lots of work making the spaces work for us, and then lots of work within the spaces as well. We were inspired to make things that we actually needed in our home. And so, you know, coming up with a really great functional soap dish, infused glass, spoon rest. We've got catch-all wool bowls to keep all of our things organized. Also adding some pops of color into what has become a very gray space, kind of using modern design aesthetics in our 1930s brick house. But we're really committed to creating handcrafted, durable, functional home goods and then decor. So where did the name come from, Camp Copeland? Neither of us are Copeland, we're Kales. But we landed on Camp Avenue in Braddock. Camp Avenue is named Camp Avenue because it was the site of a former Civil War training camp that was named Camp Copeland. So in thinking about the history of place and thinking about how our work is going to continue to live in spaces and thinking about longevity and history, we wanted to kind of give homage to Camp Copeland. Lots of things in Braddock used to be named Copeland. Most of those things are gone now. So that's sort of how we arrived at that. You'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised, how many inquiries we'll get, like as the summer season approaches, hey, I want to send my kid to your camp. Yep. Which is not something that we do, not something that we thought of when we named our business Camp Copeland. But it's fine. People are understanding, and we move on from there. So now we're 8 years into the business. I'll show you a little bit more of our work in a moment. But we're primarily selling on our website, campcopeland.com. We sell in some select stores, and then we also sell at big in-person events like Handmade Arcade. This is our very first show.
Who's that handsome guy?
So when we landed in Braddock, we got involved in some community projects that were happening there. And this is actually what Braddock Makes, the World Takes by in Braddock. This is from a 1940s newspaper that we found underneath the flooring in our attic. And I just really liked this sentiment and thinking about hyperlocality and kind of like microeconomies. So we put together a holiday show that was only for vendors that were from the 15104 zip code. It was really small. We were able to get into one of the new but still empty storefronts on Braddock Avenue, and it was on December 6th. I remember this. And just so happened to be an incredibly beautiful day. It was like 60 degrees outside. So the Brew Gentleman, which is a microbrewery across the street, had like food trucks and things, and it was packed. There were hundreds of people in this like one little block area. So we didn't really know what we were doing with our business. And so we first started off making coasters, which are kind of hard to see in that image there, but you can see stacks of glass coasters because Drew works in this technique, which he'll talk about maybe more in his section, of screen printing with glass powders onto glass and fusing that in the kiln. So we were like, what do Pittsburghers like? Pittsburghers like Pittsburgh imagery. So that's kind of where we started. We eventually figured out that glass coasters make terrible coasters, actually. And that's how we started to get more into the wool home goods, realizing that maybe textiles is a better function there. We also had some leather jewelry because I dabble in things. But now we're starting to come into our own aesthetic, and something that we try to do because we're two people working within the same studio is we really try to find through lines with our clean aesthetic. We're not afraid of color, and so we're really trying to make things that go with each other, so that you could buy a wool wall basket, but you could also maybe get a print that would go with it. There's a glass spoon rest there. Here's some more of our work. This is somewhat newer work, but these are like, I don't know, like 4 by 5 by 5.
6 by 6.
6 by 6. Circles within square plates. There's a wiggly plate up there. This is a new product that we've just released. It's a sound absorbing panel that has our baskets attached to them, so they're great for next to a desk or next to a bed or a couch, anywhere where you want things to be more peaceful but organized.
So this is when I tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Drew. I think from the very beginning, I knew that I wanted to be an artist. I didn't really know any other career trajectory from start to finish. I grew up in the 80s, reading a lot of comic books, playing a lot of Nintendo and Atari, and they influenced me so much. I just thought the world of them. I was drawing cartoons and comic books from the very beginning of like the time that I could hold a pencil. I didn't really know what to do though, so I didn't know how to achieve my goal of being an artist. So I kind of kicked around at a bunch of different jobs, worked in some grocery stores, ended up in Portland, Oregon with my lovely wife. And one day I came home from working in a grocery store and I said, you know, I'm gonna go back to school and I'm gonna be a printmaker because I like this kind of graphic aesthetic. I was kind of getting into looking at some printmakers from like the Edo period Japanese printmaking, and I was like, this is what I'm gonna do, just out of the blue. Came home one day, and she was like, okay, and then I did it. I went to school, and I went to Portland State, which actually has a really good printmaking program, and I graduated in 2008, and was like, this is it, I'm gonna be a printmaker. And then, as I eventually ended up finding glass, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I started working at Bullseye Glass Company, which is a major glass manufacturer in the world for kiln-formed glass. And when I went there, I applied for a job, and they decided, we will teach you everything you want to know about glass. This is just how they were, open book. And so I got into that, was instantly hooked on it, and decided that was what I'm going to do. So now I'm printmaking, but I'm also going to do this glass thing. When we moved back to, yes.
I was just going to say, part of the reason that you got hired at Bullseye was because they were looking for a printmaker, which is just really incredible because they were trying to develop some of the techniques around printmaking onto glass.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like you woke up one day and you thought, oh, glass.
Yeah.
It was like.
It was definitely a perfect storm of situation for me to get this job. But I was hooked. And so I've been doing that ever since. And when we moved back to town here to Pittsburgh and moved to Braddock, I bought a couple of kilns. I bought a pallet full of glass. I bought just an amazing amount of materials and shipped it all across the country and set up my part of Camp Copeland studio. And I've been doing it ever since. I teach regularly at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. I still work with Bullseye Glass. I've actually become a kiln forming consultant for a couple of smaller glass factories around Pittsburgh to help them figure out how to work with material, make materials that are going to be compatible, which is a whole other topic. But yeah, working with some nice factories to help grow kiln-formed glass. Because most of the time, when you talk about glass art, people see blown away, and they see the swashbuckling, sweaty people that are blowing molten glass and making these beautiful things. They don't, or it's stained glass. Those are usually the two that you think of. But lamp working, which the flames, and kiln-formed glass kind of get overlooked. And I think there's a really legit amount of artists and opportunity there to make really cool stuff. So it's kind of my mission to make kiln glass on the level that you would see for blown glass artists. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So this is me a lot younger and a lot hairier. And this is a printmaking residency I had at Penland School of Crafts in 2014. When I was still making, so when I was printmaking, which I'll show you some of my work in a second, I was making large-scale woodblock prints, either all black and white or huge multicolored prints. Usually about this piece here in the back is 2 feet by 4 feet was the block, all carved with wooden chisels. So going back to how I got into printmaking was the graphic qualities. Going back to, I always wanted to create a narrative. I was very interested in narrative. I was very interested in texture and patterns. And so Keith Haring was a big influence for me. Henry Darger, who I just absolutely love his work. And then Toshi Yoshida was my first introduction into Edo period Japanese woodblock. And I just think his stuff is next level. It's great. You can see pattern inside color. Just blew my mind, and this is the point where I'm like, this is what I want to do. So these are some of my prints. These are all probably about 2 feet by 4 feet. This one's a little smaller, but they were just creating layer, creating pattern, definitely playing with color and trying to get these rich images that you can actually look into that you're like, wow, I kind of want to either live there or I am completely terrified about living there. But one of those things is drawing something in, but also this graphic kind of comic book style. They're just all carved out of wood, all just printed on without a press most of the time too, just to kind of give me that hands-on feel.
Sorry, slacking.
That's fine. And then going also into the imagery. So I made these. These are all my wood blocks as well. So I got really into making images of industry. So children, these are all taken from old textbooks. So children working cotton mills, Pittsburgh steelworkers. This is a Pittsburgh scene. There's another cotton in the South. But working on mark making and patterns and how marks make images, just a series of little chunks carved out of a wood block can actually make something beautiful and create an overall encompassing image. So I was really fascinated by this. for a long time. And then this phrase here on the top changed my life. So I was looking for a job. Alyssa decided to go back to grad school, as she said. And I was working at a produce market in Portland where I was getting paid mostly with food and not with really US dollars. So I decided, well, if Alyssa's going back to school, I should probably make some money. So I was looking in Craigslist and I saw this ad. It said, scare your enemies and impress your friends, learn to cast molten glass. And I said, I have no idea what that means, but that's what I'm gonna do with my life. So I applied to this job, and it was at Bullseye Glass Factory, and they interviewed me and everything, and they took me down to the casting floor, and what they did was hand cast ladles of glass. Guys like this tall, all day, just ladles of glass, casting sheets. And they looked at me and they're like, I don't know if you want to do this. I was like, I do want to do this 100%. And then they said, I think we have a better spot for you. And they put me in their resource center. And they taught me so much about glass. They were like, if you're going to work here, you're going to sell glass, you're going to help people in open studios, all this other stuff. You need to know how to make things with the glass. And it was like the changing point in my life. As Alyssa said, they were also working a lot with like screen printing with glass, lithography with glass, all these crazy cool things were happening at the time. So I decided to figure out how to do relief printing on glass. And so this is one of the only images I still have. But this is a block, it's about 1.5 inches thick. And it's just layers of clear glass that have been printed with linoleum blocks and different types of material with glass powders. And it's been all fired into one big solid chunk that you can actually see through. So going back to those like pieces, which we don't have to go back, where you look into the images, I was actually able to do that with clear glass. And it just blew my mind. And I'm like just completely sold on it. Since then, I still screen printing with glass powders. You can do really nice techniques with that to get bright poppy colors and patterns. But I just took off. I just was sold in making all kinds of different work, from little vessels to plates to huge platters. I just fell in love with glass. Going back to the functional products that I make, spoon rests. Over there is one of our biggest seller pieces of our standard product line, but also these soap dishes. One of our friends has a soap business, and he was saying how he could never find a soap dish to like share with his customers because they either the soap either sat in the water in the dish, or it got like the water didn't drain out, or like this, it just got scummy. So I created this piece, which is kind of like a cast glass piece that has these raised little nodes, and then I drill little holes in them. So it's creating the functionality while still having some kind of glass art style. Reducing our carbon footprint. So a couple of years ago, as any glass person who has their own home studio knows, you end up with a lot of leftover scrap that you don't know what to do with. And I came up with this technique to actually cast it into glass vessels. So these are just all one-of-a-kind pieces from leftover scrap, playing with chemical reactions between glass colors, which you can see these little dark lines right here. And it creates this kind of this like wabi-sabi, one-of-a-kind, unique, organic vessel, just all, and it's reducing all the leftover material that we have to usually store or get rid of. And these are the new things. So going all the way back to the beginning, cartoons as a kid, playing with Atari and Nintendo, I decided I really missed that. So over the past 6 months or so, I started making kiln-formed glass bunny creatures with like little polka dots on them, and these descriptive little areas that you can like picture, like Legend of Zelda, like a little adventurer going in this little door and figuring out where to go next and save the princess. We're going back to patterns. I'm having these repeated patterns and color effects that I try to just really kind of make these images pop off and make them look more like I drew them on paper rather than they're a piece of glass. They're all matte. They're not glossy at all. They're kiln formed, cold worked, and then shaped into these different pieces. But I'm still making prints, as I started, so these are the newest of the block print line that I do. Still doing these little abstract little figures and playing a little bit with color, and especially different types of marks. Marks is going to be just the thing. Mark making and pattern is what basically all of my work goes back to. And I think that's just the key to my artistic life. Did I ramble?
No, you're great. You're doing great on time.
Good.
So getting a little bit into my work, I primarily have two different realms that I'm working in right now. One is the wool vessels that are more production work. So I'm designing these are original shapes, and then I'm hand cutting and hand shaping all of these, but I'm working with a machine-made wool that's actually a remnant from the interior design world. And so I'll talk about it in a minute, but I have a long career in the sustainability field, and so I'm very interested in making the most out of the materials that already exist, and also working with natural materials. So this basket, if you took the metal grommets out of and the metal bolts out of there, you could just throw it in your compost pile once you were done with it. This is primarily what I'm working on in the studio now, which is going back to pre-grad school work, which is something that I actually found a lot of, is that many of the people in my cohort experimented a lot in graduate school, which I'll show you in a moment, but ended up going back to the craft that they were working in before they started, but hopefully, with some advanced thinking and advanced skill sets. So this is a wet felted piece. Actually, it's many wet felted pieces that I've stitched together. So I'm going back to my love of sewing, which is where I started in the studio. When I was 16, my best friend, her mother managed the thrift store in our tiny town, and that meant that we got to dig through the bags of things before they got put out on the floor. So we got like the nice stuff, but nothing fit. So I had to teach myself how to sew in order to make things fit, and then I was hooked ever since, and will always go back to the sewing machine as my kind of, place of zen within the studio. I'll talk more about this felted work a little bit later. So to go back to grad school and even before grad school, so I got a BA from University of Pittsburgh. I was very interested in environmental sustainability. I thought I was going to be this world-traveling eco-activist. I also loved the environmental studies program because it was like dabbling in the sciences. So I only had to take like Chem 1 and 2, but I didn't have to get too deep into it, which is like where my skill sets start to weaken a little bit. But it was also kind of just like a pre-master's degree program. So when I came out with this BA, I wasn't like prepared for a job. So I dabbled. I worked in some different environmental nonprofits. I've done trail building. I've done urban farming. In Portland, we're from Pittsburgh originally. We moved out to Portland in 2006. And out there, I was actually hired at a nonprofit that blended my interest in creativity and the environment, which was a creative reuse nonprofit. And so we were taking donations of art supplies, but also random stuff, trying to make sense of it, package it in a beautiful way that made people feel inspired and creative, and use those materials for their own artistic projects. So after facilitating those programs for a while, I was like, okay, I'm 30 or in my early 30s. I really want to go to art school. I know it's not practical. I really want to do it. So I applied and I got into this program, which I thought was like I thought it was the perfect program because it was really rooted in entrepreneurism. And so I thought, okay, like I'm gonna come out of this program, we're gonna know how to run a business, we're gonna know how to sell stuff. It's gonna be perfect. And so it's an MFA in applied craft and design. So there's fine art, craft, and design. And I think we're working in all of those realms within our work, or at least touching on them. It was a collaborative degree between Oregon College of Art and Craft and Pacific Northwest College of Art, both of which are now defunct. PNCA actually was absorbed into another university in Portland, but OCAC closed after 112 years of operation, unfortunately. Some of the work that I was doing there, so once I got into art school, I got really wild and free and was going big. I was making big work. And so this is actually one of the smallest pieces that I did in any of my shows while in school. And what I was doing was I was trying to find moments. We worked in this huge shipbuilding warehouse. That was our studio space. And so it had all this old architecture, but it was also just massive. And so I started to think about like the way that the light hit the corners and, you know, these old, wonderful, like industrial paint lines on the floor. And so this is sort of an interruption of that corner where I put this thin plywood over the corner to create a curve. And then there was this thin little strip that within that space, just between, you know, the plywood, it was maybe 3 feet back to the corner. There were all these lights, and I was playing with texture. I was printing on Mylar, so there were reflections and layers. But it was at like waist level. So you had to look. You had to bend down and look in. But when you looked in, you could maybe get some sort of, you know, essence of the cosmos or something, some otherworldly experience that was in this boring corner in this shipbuilding warehouse. So I was thinking a lot about some kind of trippy stuff, the known and the unknown, some kind of sci-fi spaces. I thought a lot about the void. I was really like deep in it. But I also have always used photography as a way to kind of frame things and see things differently. So this is just a scrap piece of bright orange plexiglass that I love. And I was putting it, you know, right up to the lens of the camera and taking pictures of these like crazy Douglas fir forests that are out in Oregon. Really great fog. This is another piece that I did in grad school, again, installing right within the space of the warehouse. This was kind of a black hole where I printed, this is a piece of styrofoam, a big styrofoam ring that I got from the hardware store that I think you put underneath a water heater, but it had this incredible texture. And I had been around Drew as a printmaker. I'm not a printmaker, but I love the texture of this thing. And so I inked it up about 25 times and printed it on this Mylar and hung the Mylar from these runners that I installed within the space. This was a really great piece to kind of walk around and experience the dimensionality of it. Also, it was really meant to kind of reflect you within the piece. And so you could kind of catch a glimpse of your face within the layers of the Mylar. It was also attracted so much dust. So I was like wiping dust off of the Mylar all the time until I deinstalled. This was another piece that was, that I actually cried when we installed. I don't know if you remember that, but it was, so this is layers of wax and sand. And so I was like going back to my geology studies in environmental studies and just thinking about layers and time and lots of sort of things within that realm. It was tethered about 14 feet up on the wall and then came down and tethered into these existing metal parts that were in the floor of this industrial building. But I didn't know what was going to happen when all that tension was put onto these pieces of wax and sand that had been created horizontally. And so once we hung them, this split apart, and I thought my life was over. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of tension in the fishing line, but there was also a lot of tension inside of me. But I actually really liked the way that it turned out. Yeah, and so this was a piece that you could also walk all the way around, and it was it's like bizarre to have these things suspended in the air. Where did they come from? What are they made of? I've had a couple of really interesting residencies that I'd like to touch on. And I think that these residencies are like a time to play. They also kind of skew my work in one way or the other, but I think I sometimes come back to these ideas. It's just a wonderful opportunity to kind of get out of your own way of making. So one of the first residencies that I had when I was still in grad school was at the waste transfer station in Portland, which is the dump. And so we had 6 months to go, and it's a place where individual people are bringing trailers of stuff. So it's not like the commercial haulers that are like emptying out the big nasty trucks. So it was like mostly dry, somewhat clean. And so this is one of the sculptures that I created that I think is way outside of anything that I've ever made, but it was called Worthless Useful. I also did a residency at Carey Furnace, which is a little closer to home here. I don't think they're going to do this residency anymore, but it was a time, again, where I got to spend many months at Carey Furnaces, which is an old blast furnace site. So steelmaking history. This time I got to get back into my textile making, so I had a couple of different things installed on that site, but one of the things that I did was I went back to photography, and I took photography of this old industrial site, abstracted it, hand painted these large silk panels with some color blocking behind it, and then hung those in windows where there were no longer windows. And so if you were inside of this dark building, the light coming through, you would kind of see what you might have seen in the past with some of the architecture that used to be there. I also installed inside of that building, I was trying to re-energize the space, and so I have this spool of this neon orange, again going back to color, polyester thread that I've installed in a couple of different places, and just stringing it between existing architectural features to create kind of laser lines of energy. By the time I deinstalled this work, most of those lines were broken by animals, people, wind. I had a residency in 2019 at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. I had wanted to get into some self-portraiture work, which was, I tend to not work in representational work at all. But I had cut off my hair. This was an 18-inch braid. And I knew that Drew had a lot of glass experience, but I felt like this casting was really much more technical than anything that we had ever achieved in our studio. And so I went to the Glass Center and I was like, hey, I want to cast my hair. And they said, great, we have this residency called the Idea Furnace. And so I was able to sort of cast this remnant of me, and then I also had some, this is powder printing on glass. They were illuminated by LEDs. So I wanted to print with white as much as possible, so I did a lot of testing and experimenting to see how actually little color I could use and little contrast I could use within these pieces when they were not lit. And so the lighter color image there is when the glass was not backlit, and I was just thinking about the texture and the thickness of the glass powders. I also intentionally offset the image, which was some of the concepts that I was working through with this self-portraiture, kind of a unknowing of self. And so that's intentional. It does kind of give me a mustache a little bit, but that's okay. And then this is when the piece is backlit, so then you really see the image coming through. The last residency that I'll talk about was Pentaculum in February of 2020, right before everything shut down. I was invited to spend a week at Aramont School of Crafts in their fiber studio. And so I was flying there. I didn't want to take a lot of work or materials down, and I didn't want to have to bring a lot of things back. And so what I really focused on that week was painting these silk pieces that I then end up incorporating into my felted pieces. And so I just spent the whole week, again, going back to photography, walking around. Aramont is in Gatlinburg, which is a very interesting place where the school is kind of up in the forested hills, but the strip of Gatlinburg is like a tiny Las Vegas. So it's very contrasting and very interesting. But these are some of the panels of silk that I was playing around with. I was also layering, again, layering the panels of silk just to see what kind of effects I could get there. So these are all just little samples that I took pictures of so that I could kind of remember, but none of these were finished pieces. I ended up just bringing a suitcase full home of silk panels ready to be incorporated into other things. And here is how some of the things get incorporated. So this is primarily the studio work that I'm doing now. And I think it relates to what I was doing in grad school, but on a much more manageable scale. So I'm still working in the abstract, and I'm still thinking about landscape and like how we know ourselves within space and how we relate to that landscape. My felts used to be much more like obviously a landscape, but I've moved away from that a little bit. I think just to jazz them up, and also I wanted to get back onto the sewing machine. So instead of felting huge pieces, I'm now pulling together some of my smaller pieces with stitching. I've recently added drips to everything. And I haven't fully fleshed out this concept, but it has to do with how we elevate painting. But we look at textile work as crafty and, maybe just not like on the same level. And so, at least for me, when I look at paintings in a museum, I get right up close to them. Like I make the security guards nervous because I want to see the drips, I want to see the process. And I want to see how it's made. And so these drips here are applied after the fact, and they're just sort of a little wink to those ideas around painting. And hopefully people really want to get up close and see the drips on my work too. I've recently started teaching felting, and specifically the felting techniques that you see here. So these are silk panels that I mentioned before that get woven into the wool in a process called nuno-felting. So you layer the woven silk on top of the wool, and as you're working the material, the wool comes up through, holds on to that piece of silk, so there's no adhesive there, and then becomes one and creates some really interesting textures. So I've recently started teaching this technique. I've taught it at a couple of different art centers around town. I have one coming up on November 11th. If anyone's interested in signing up.
Here.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah, it's here on November 11th. It's a ton of fun, it's pretty low tech, and there's a lot of room for creativity. Each person leaves with their own piece of mounted wall art at the end of the day. And here we are back at Camp Copeland. We're where we believe in fewer, better things. We want people to have less but better things in their homes, and we hope that the things that we make provide that for them. So you can find us on social media. We're at Camp Copeland everywhere. And anything else?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay.
Yeah. You could find our class schedule online too for both of us.
Oh yes, that's all at
All the others,
campcopeland.com.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.